welcome back to another episode of the Joi of Sewing. We are learning all kinds of fundamental skills to build our sewing repertoire, and now we are going to discuss tucks and darts. Just another way to manipulate our fabric to make it fit the body or other sewing projects. In a previous episode, we've talked about pleats and gathers, and a tuck is really fairly similar to a pleat in that you're usually just folding the fabric together in order to fit it into an area that's maybe smaller than what your fabric measures. So basically I have the fabric folded over, indicating a tuck. You might constitute that as a pleat as well, and it might look different depending on what your pattern calls for and where you're going to put this in whatever you're sewing. So I don't really need to stitch this out. I just want to kind of reference that's going to kind of fall in that same type of manipulation of the fabric. What's really fun, however, are doing darts. Let's take a look at what a dart is. All right, so a dart is putting a seam or a fabric manipulation into your fabric, but it does not go all the way across the fabric. Instead, it's pulling in a certain amount of the fabric so that it will conform around a curve or contour to the body. A dart is really kind of the shape of a triangle, but they can be very large, very small, short, long. They can curve. So there's many ways that you're going to see these on your patterns. But in essence, a basic dart will just be pretty much a triangle shape. On the front of the fabric, let's take a look here at what this looks like. The dart is fatter at the edge of the fabric, and then it tapers into a point, and you'll see that point right here. When it's on the body, and I'll try to just kind of wrap this around the machine here, it will flatten out, and thus the fabric is now hugging your body. This is really common around the bust area because you're going to pull the fabric in and make it fit the contour of the body. You might see this on pants, going over the backside. Elbow darts on sleeves, which will allow your arm to bend. Many applications. Let's go ahead and learn how to make a dart. We come over here to our cutting area. I have a dart penciled out on the fabric. Now we'll see what this looks like in a later episode when we're talking about actual pattern markings, but right now I just have gone in and I've chalked one out on the fabric. A dart is always going to have a tip, and then the dart is going to be very wide at the edge. What's going to happen is you're going to bring the two edges together and then to a point. And what I like to do is grab a pin, and I'm going to put that in the fat part of the dart on one side, and then I'm going to flip it over and see how I lined up. Now I'm off just a little bit there, so what I'm going to do is unpin that and adjust my dart just a little bit, and that's just about right on the other side. Then I'm going to go ahead and put one or two more pins in there as needed. Sometimes I will put a little pin right at the end of my dart just so I know exactly where to start and stop as I'm sewing. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like when we're going to be actually marking the dart. If you watched my episode talking about sewing tools, I mentioned tracing paper and a tracing wheel. Now's a really good opportunity to kind of test this out. Your tracing paper has a little bit of a film on it, and what you're going to do is you're going to put that on at least one side of your fabric, depending on how many pieces or layers that you're marking. And then I went ahead and just drew a dart shape on my paper, but for the most part, you're going to have a pattern on top of your fabric that you're going to trace over. But for now, this will give you a really good idea of how to do this. If you're really good at freehanding, you could literally take your needlepoint tracing wheel and trace that. However, this dart has a nice straight edge, so I'm going to take a ruler and line that up, and then I'm going to take my needlepoint tracing wheel and I'm going to push and trace that. And then I'm going to move my ruler, and then I'm going to continue on the opposite side. When we remove the tracing paper, and let's see if you can see that, but there's a dotted broken line, and it's in yellow because our tracing paper is yellow, and that actually has transferred that dart onto my fabric. I really, 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 if you can't tell the emphasis, like tracing paper for doing darts. The markings that are on there are very faint, and your tracing paper comes in a few different colors when you buy a little package of it. So it's a little bit closer to the hue or the shade of the fabric that you're working in, and it doesn't show through on the opposite side. Some fabrics you may or may not use some of your other marking tools on, although this sample right here is a twill or a denim fabric that I'm not really worried about the markings on there. But again, I just really like the subtleness of the tracing paper, and it gives me a really good crisp dart shape. Let's set that aside. For our purposes here, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm just going to trace over top of the dart that I just drew with some of my wax chalk, just so you can see how that looks. There's a thread on there. All right, so we're just going to trace that. And then I'm going to put that on the other side and connect the dots as well. And that would be how you might use some chalk to mark that. And we also referenced in our tool chapter the little roller. Now I'm already marked it, so I don't really have a need, but I just thought I would show this and how precision that is. So if you have an area that maybe isn't really crisp and straight like a ruler, maybe it's curved, that's where this little chalk marker is going to come into the mix, because look at the shapes you can make with that. Okay, let's go ahead and pin our dart. And I showed you this a minute ago, but we will go ahead and show you how we're going to sew this. I'm going to put a pin, again, just at the base of the dart. Whoops, that one I need to adjust just a little bit more. Perfect. And then, as I illustrated, I love putting a pin in the tip of the dart because it really helps hold it together. Most of the time, 1 or 2 pins is sufficient, but if you happen to have a dart that's very, very long, I might actually put an additional pin in there. Now, I want to point out that these pins I have going with the direction of the chalk line. You're not going to sew over pins ever, so we will need to make sure that we remove those before we begin. Let's talk about sewing the dart. There are a couple schools of thought on this. Traditionally, you start at the base of the dart and sew to the tip, and you do not backstitch at the tip of the dart because you want to tie the threads off. The reasoning being that it helps reduce bulk. If you're doing a very, very, very thin fabric, I would definitely do that. However, and this is just a Joyism how I do it, I a lot of times like to start at the tip of my dart because I've got the pin there and I can put my needle down right in that position. Then I can drop my foot, I'm going to remove my pin, and my needle is now at the tip of the dart. It's a little non-traditional, but it really doesn't hurt anything. And then I like being able to sew right to the fat part of the dart. I feel that I get a more accurate dart doing that instead of starting at the fat part. However, if you've learned a different way, that's fine with me. Or if you want to try it both ways, you can do that too. We are going to go ahead and start sewing. And I am going to backstitch here. Now I'm breaking a rule. I'm definitely breaking a rule by backstitching here at the tip of the dart. My fabric is a little bit heavier, and so I want to make sure that that dart doesn't come unsewn. And my personal view, coming from like a person who makes patterns, is that I actually like backstitching at the tip of the dart, because if the pattern fits well and is contouring to your body, it's not going to be bulky and it's not going to come to a weird point or anything like that. And you know, that's just something you can experiment with. But if you're finding that you don't like tying the threads off, don't feel that you can't backstitch. Okay, I'm at the end. I went back and forward to anchor that off. I'm going to cut the thread, lift my presser foot, and here's what our dart looks like sewn. It's the same on the back. And then if we open that up, and what might be kind of fun is this very well could represent what a garment might look like. And you probably might recognize that if this were a left and a right on the front of a body. That might be a bust fitting dart on both sides. Now, the thing about dart seam allowance is that you always want to press downward. So if this was on the body, you would press that excess down. Or if this were an up and down dart, you would press everything toward the middle. And that's just kind of a good rule of thumb for the direction of where your seams are going to be placed. Darts are a really great fitting tool. I am a big fan of darts. That's probably one of my number one sewing techniques that I use to manipulate fabric. You can use more darts than are included on your pattern if needed, if that helps your garments to fit better and not have any excess bulk or things like that. Just know that you can pin darts in even if it's not included in something that you're making, if that helps your garments or your sewing look even better. And they're easy to do. All right, I encourage you to find a pattern that has some darts in it, practice sewing them, and practice seeing how they make the fabric manipulate around the body. I hope you've enjoyed learning this lesson. In our next episode, we are going to take a look at top stitching and stay stitching and why that's important. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.